A Long Island man accused of murdering his own father, a retired Suffolk County police detective. Today, his 43-year-old son was in court to face charges. He pleaded not guilty to the murder, but says he is guilty of insanity. A Long Island reporter.
A quiet home in Dix Hills, New York. A father and son, alone inside. Then, gunshots. John Miller, a 75-year-old retired detective and longtime firefighter, was found dead, shot multiple times. His own son, 43-year-old Christopher Miller, was arrested just hours later. But here's where things take a strange turn. 2 days before the murder, John had reported Christopher missing. He couldn't reach him, he was worried. And then, just days later, his son allegedly turned on him with a shotgun. What went wrong inside that house? What could push a man to kill the very person who had been searching for him? By the end of this video, you'll know the full story, every chilling detail, every unanswered question. But most importantly, you'll be left wondering, was this a sudden explosion of rage? Or had this moment been building for years? Let's go back to where it all started. March 19, 2024. Just after sunset, a call comes into Suffolk County Police. A homeowner reports a man lurking in her backyard, silent, unresponsive. Moments later, he disappears into her shed. Officers arrive, searching the property. Inside the shed, they find 43-year-old Christopher Miller. He doesn't resist. He doesn't explain. But something about him seems familiar. One of the officers recognizes him immediately. It's the same man whose father had reported him missing just 2 days earlier. Then, back at the Miller home, officers make a disturbing discovery. Inside, they find 75-year-old John Miller, slumped over, lifeless. He has been shot multiple times. A shotgun is recovered at the scene. Christopher Miller is taken into custody. The charges? Second-degree murder. But what happened inside that house? To understand this crime, we have to go back 2 days earlier, when a father went looking for his son. John Miller spent his life in service. A retired Suffolk County detective. A firefighter for over 5 decades. He wasn't just respected, he was trusted. For 57 years, he was a member of the Wyandanch Volunteer Fire Company. He led crews into burning buildings, mentored younger firefighters, and even served as chief 4 times. To those who knew him, he was more than a leader. He was a protector. But behind the uniform, behind the decades of service, John Miller was also a father. A man who, in his later years, found himself living alone with his adult son, Christopher. To the outside world, he was a figure of strength. But inside that house, things weren't so simple. Because just days before his murder, John was searching for his son. Christopher Miller was 43 years old and at a turning point in his life. Recently divorced, he had moved back into his childhood home in Dix Hills, New York, back under the same roof as his father. It wasn't just the divorce. Christopher had lost his mother years earlier. He was struggling, trying to rebuild his life. But moving back home didn't bring stability, it brought tension. On March 17th, everything escalated. Christopher was involved in a car accident, a routine crash at first. But what happened next wasn't routine. Instead of exchanging insurance information and waiting for authorities, Christopher got into a physical altercation with the other driver. The situation became violent enough that he was taken to the hospital. And that's when John Miller started to worry. For hours, he couldn't reach his son. No calls, no messages, nothing. For a man who had spent his entire life protecting others, this wasn't something he could ignore. John did what any concerned father would do. He filed a missing persons report. It wasn't long before police found Christopher. He was still in the hospital. Whatever had happened in that car accident, whatever led to the fight, it left him injured. But after being discharged, he didn't return to his own home. He went back to his father's house. Back to the place where, just 2 days later, John Miller would be dead. So, what happened inside that house? How did a father and son go from a reunion to a murder scene? The final moments before John Miller's death hold the answers. March 19, 2024. The last night of John Miller's life. Inside the Miller home, father and son are alone. No witnesses. No cameras. Just 2 men with years of history between them. At some point that evening, an argument erupts. Maybe it was about Christopher's behavior, the car accident, the missing persons report. Maybe it was about something deeper, something that had been building for years. What we do know is this: it escalated. At some point, Christopher left the argument, walked upstairs into his room. But he didn't stay there. Instead, he came back down, holding a shotgun. John Miller wasn't the kind of man to back down. He had faced danger before, seen violence up close. He wasn't about to let his son point a gun at him. Authorities say John tried to wrestle the weapon away, but it was too late. Gunshots. Multiple rounds. John Miller, a retired detective, a firefighter, a man who had dedicated his life to saving others, now lay dying in his own home. Christopher didn't call 911. He didn't stay. Instead, he ran. But he wouldn't get far. Because the next time police saw Christopher, he was hiding inside a stranger's shed. After the gunshots, Christopher Miller didn't stay. No attempt to help his father. Number 911 call. Instead, he walked out the front door and disappeared into the night. But he didn't go far. A few streets away, a neighbor noticed something strange. A man, walking through her backyard, silent, avoiding eye contact. Then, without a word, he stepped into her shed and shut the door. She called the police. When officers arrived, they didn't know what they were dealing with. A trespasser? A burglary? But as soon as one officer saw Christopher Miller, he recognized him immediately. It was the same man from 2 days earlier, the subject of John Miller's missing person report. Something wasn't right. Christopher was taken back to the Miller home. And that's when police made their chilling discovery. Inside, John Miller's body was found, shot multiple times. Christopher Miller was arrested on the spot, charged with second-degree murder. But even as officers placed him in custody, one question remained. Why? Was this a sudden, violent outburst? Or was it something that had been building for years? With Christopher Miller in custody, the investigation moved quickly. Authorities charged him with second-degree murder, a crime that carries the possibility of 25 years to life in prison. But the details of the case raised even more questions. Police confirmed that John Miller had tried to stop his son, tried to take the shotgun away. But he was overpowered. A man who had spent his life in law enforcement and firefighting, who had survived dangerous situations, couldn't escape the threat inside his own home. As news of the murder spread, the community was in shock.
The most wonderful family. I can't say enough about them. And, Jack's record speaks for himself. And yesterday was a very disturbing day for us all.
The Wyandanch Volunteer Fire Company, where John had dedicated 57 years of his life, mourned his loss. Fellow firefighters called him a mentor, a leader, a father figure. Now they were planning his funeral. But as the investigation continued, one question stood out. What was happening inside Christopher Miller's mind that night? Was this just a moment of uncontrollable rage? Or were there deeper, long-standing issues beneath the surface? The trial will have to answer that question. A father, a retired detective, a firefighter, a man who spent his life serving others. A son, recently divorced, struggling, caught in a downward spiral. And one tragic night that ended in murder. But the biggest question remains. Was this a crime of passion, a sudden, violent breaking point? Or was there something deeper at play, a history of tension that finally exploded? What do you think happened that night? Was this a moment of uncontrollable rage? Or did something else push Christopher Miller to kill? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more deep dive true crime stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.